After midnight, buildings don't sleep, they listen. Security monitors glow, hallways stretch endlessly, and silence grows loud enough to hear your own thoughts. These stories come from logbooks and late-night reports written by people paid to stay awake. Entry number when everyone else is gone. Like every other night, the kind that teaches you how loud an empty building can be when it thinks no one is listening. I signed in at 11:47 p.m., clipped the keys to my belt, and watched the last cleaning crew cart roll through the west exit, the old regional museum settling into its after-hours stillness as the lights dimmed to their nighttime glow. I had worked this job long enough to know the routine by heart. 3 floors, 19 galleries, exhibits ranging from indigenous tools to Civil War uniforms to a reconstructed 1920s living room that always smelled faintly of dust and old wood, the kind of place that felt frozen in time even during the day. At night it felt different, like time loosened its grip. My job was simple: lock the doors, monitor the cameras, do a patrol every hour, and write anything unusual in the logbook. Most nights the only thing worth noting was a faulty sensor or a raccoon setting off the loading dock alarm. That night started no differently: doors secured, perimeter check complete, cameras steady. The monitors bathed the security room in pale blue light, each screen showing an empty gallery, silent and still. At 12:32 a.m. the first motion alert chimed. Gallery 3, native artifacts. I sighed, assuming it was another glitch. The sensors there were old and sensitive to temperature shifts. I pulled up the camera feed and saw nothing out of the ordinary. Display cases lined up neatly, woven baskets and carved masks, resting exactly where they had been when I walked through earlier. I logged it as a false alarm and went back to my coffee. 10 minutes later another alert, same gallery. I frowned, checked the feed again, still nothing moving, but something felt off. One of the freestanding mannequins displaying ceremonial clothing was angled slightly toward the camera. I was sure it hadn't been like that before. Mannequins don't move, I told myself. Perspective plays tricks at night. I noted the second alert, and decided to do an early patrol. Walking the halls after midnight always felt like stepping into a photograph. The exhibits lit just enough to see but not enough to feel alive. My footsteps echoed softly on the polished floors. When I reached Gallery 3 everything looked normal. I even checked the mannequin, its base firmly planted, no sign it had shifted. I chalked it up to nerves and continued on. At 1:14 a.m. the tapping started, faint at first, like fingernails brushing glass. It came from somewhere above me, the sound echoing down the stairwell. I froze, listening. Tap, 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 slow and deliberate. I radioed into Central Security, but got only static. The museum's radios were spotty in certain areas. I followed the sound to the second floor, decorative arts. The tapping stopped as soon as I entered the gallery. The silence afterward felt heavier than the noise had. I checked each display case. None were disturbed, no cracks, no loose fixtures. I logged the sound and went back to the security room, trying not to think about how deliberate it had sounded, like someone testing the glass. At 2:03 a.m. motion alert, Gallery 7, historical figures. This time when I pulled up the camera feed my stomach tightened. The mannequins had changed, not dramatically, but enough that I knew it wasn't my imagination. One that had been facing forward was now turned slightly to the left. Another's arm hung lower, as if it had slumped. I rewound the footage, watching the last hour play. Back at high speed, nothing moved. One frame they were one way, the next frame they were different. No blur, no transition, just wrong. I swallowed hard and wrote in the logbook, mannequins appear repositioned. Possible maintenance error, though I knew maintenance hadn't been scheduled in weeks. I forced myself to do another patrol. The galleries felt closer now, the walls leaning in. Every shadow seemed deeper. In Gallery 7 I stood among the mannequins, waxy faces frozen in expressions meant to represent historical figures, generals, politicians, ordinary citizens. under the dim lights there. I seemed too reflective. I adjusted one of the figures back to its original position, marking the floor with a piece of tape so I could tell if it moved again. My hands shook as I did it. At 2:41 a.m. the footsteps began, soft, measured, not echoing like mine, but padded, as if something were walking barefoot on carpet. I heard them on the third floor, then on the second, then somewhere behind me. Every instinct told me not to turn around, but I did, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing there. The footsteps stopped. I stood there for a long moment, hard hammering, before retreating to the security room and locking the door. The monitors showed empty halls, but now I noticed small things. A chair in the 1920s exhibit angled away from the table, a display brochure scattered across the floor, things I was sure had been tidy earlier. The logbook entries grew shorter after that. 3:05 footsteps heard again, location unclear. 3:22 tapping resumed, decorative arts. 3:37 motion alert, gallery 7, tape marker displaced. I didn't go back out after that. I watched the cameras, eyes darting from screen to screen. At 4:11 a.m. one of the feeds flickered, just for a second, and when it stabilized the mannequin I had marked was standing closer to the camera, its face filling more of the frame. I hadn't seen it move, but it was closer. I felt something cold settle in my chest, a certainty that whatever was happening didn't care whether I watched or not. The sounds continued, footsteps pacing, glass tapping. Once I heard what sounded like fabric dragging across the floor, like heavy clothing being pulled. My final patrol alarm sounded at 5 a.m., but I ignored it. Dawn was less than an hour away. I told myself I could wait it out. At 5:26 a.m., I wrote the last entry, handwriting barely legible. Something is walking the halls after hours. At 6:02 a.m. the day staff arrived, light flooding the museum. The sound stopped instantly. The exhibits looked normal again. Mannequins back in their places, chairs tucked in, brochures neatly stacked. I told my supervisor I was feeling unwell and went home. Later that afternoon I got a call asking why I'd written such strange notes in the logbook. Maintenance hadn't found anything wrong. Nothing was missing, nothing damaged. I didn't go back for my next shift. I resigned by email. A week later, curiosity got the better of me and I visited the museum during the day. Walking through the galleries as a guest, everything looked peaceful, harmless, until I noticed the mannequins in Gallery 7. Their expressions seemed more worn somehow, the paint around their eyes cracked, their clothing creased as if it had been slept in. Nothing was stolen, but some exhibits were. I started the overnight security job at the hospital because I thought it would be quiet, predictable, almost boring. 12-hour shifts watching cameras, logging doors, making sure no one wandered where they shouldn't. The hospital itself was old, built in sections over decades, with new wings grafted onto older ones like scar tissue. And by the time I was assigned there, the third floor west wing had already been closed for nearly 3 years. Officially it was under renovation, unofficially. Everyone knew it was a problem area. Too many complaints, too many incidents, too many deaths clustered too close together. The administration sealed it off, locked the stairwell doors, disabled patient access, and issued a simple rule to night security: no patrols on the third floor west wing after 2 a.m., monitor only, no exceptions. The rule wasn't explained, and I didn't ask. Hospitals are full of rules that exist because someone once learned the hard way. My first few weeks went smoothly. Nights blurred together in a rhythm of humming fluorescent lights, the soft beep of distant monitors, the occasional ambulance arrival breaking the monotony. The third floor west wing cameras were always part of my rotation, for feeds showing long empty corridors, nurses' stations stripped bare, patient room doors hanging open like mouths. The place looked hollowed out, like the shell of something that had died but hadn't been buried yet. Most nights nothing happened. The cameras showed exactly what they were supposed to show: empty hallways and stillness. At 1:17 a.m. on my 23rd shift, the elevator panel chimed at the security desk, indicating a call from the 3rd floor west wing. I frowned. Elevators glitch all the time. I logged it as a malfunction and reset the system. 5 minutes later it happened again. Same floor, same elevator. I pulled up the camera feed for the elevator lobby. The doors were closed, the hallway empty, no movement. I watched for a full minute, nothing. I made a note in the log and moved on. At 1:46 a.m. the call came again, this time 2 elevators, both registering a request from the same closed floor. A cold irritation crept up my spine. I called maintenance, but no one answered. Overnight crews were thin. I reset the system again, telling myself it was just old wiring. Then at 2:03 a.m. the radios crackled, not with a voice, but with something that sounded like breathing, slow, wet, too close to the microphone. I checked my own radio first, thinking maybe it was feedback, but the sound was coming through the general channel. I keyed in, asked if anyone else was transmitting. No response, just the breathing, followed by a faint whisper, numbers, spoken slowly, 147. I felt my mouth go dry. I switched the radio off and on. The sound stopped. I logged it, though my hands shook as I wrote. The rule about no patrols after 2 a.m. echoed in my head, and for the first time I wondered why it existed. At 2:22 a.m. motion detection triggered on camera 3B, 3rd floor west wing, hallway near room 312. My heart rate spiked. Motion sensors in that wing were supposed to be disabled. I pulled up the feed and there it was, a figure standing at the far end of the hall, partially obscured by shadow, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a hospital gown, its back to the camera. I stared, barely breathing. The figure didn't move, didn't sway, didn't fidget, it just stood there, as if waiting. I told myself it had to be a reflection, a lighting glitch, anything, but the shape was too solid, too human. I broke protocol and grabbed my flashlight, heading toward the stairwell that led to the 3rd floor. I told myself I just needed to confirm the camera error. I wouldn't actually enter the wing. As I climbed the stairs the air grew colder, the smell changed, antiseptic giving way to something older, metallic, like dried blood. When I reached the locked door to the west wing corridor I shined my light through the small reinforced window. The hallway beyond was empty, no figure, no movement, just a long stretch of linoleum and peeling paint. Relief washed over me so fast my knees went weak. I laughed quietly at myself and turned back. When I returned to the security desk the camera feed showed the figure again, closer now, standing directly beneath the camera, its head tilted upward. Though I couldn't see its face, the screen flickered, and the figure vanished. Not walking away, not fading, just gone. Like it had never been there. The radio crackled back to life, breathing again, followed by more numbers, 3, 1, 2. I didn't turn it off this time. I listened, a terrible sense of recognition creeping in. I pulled up the hospital's old patient database, searching for room 312. The records were incomplete. Digitization had started years after the wing was closed. But there were scan logs, handwritten notes, death reports. Room 312 appeared again and again. Pneumonia, complications, cardiac arrest, infection. The dates clustered tightly, a pattern of deaths over less than a year. I cross-referenced the numbers whispered over the radio, 147, 312. They were room numbers, always from the 3rd floor west wing, always rooms where patients had died. My chest felt tight, like the air itself had thickened. At 3:10 a.m. the elevator chimed again, not just a call this time, but an arrival. The doors opened on the ground floor to reveal an empty car. The interior camera showed faint smudges on the walls, handprints maybe. I closed the doors and disabled the elevator entirely, writing in the log with hurried strokes, shadow figure observed, possible trespasser, investigation pending. Even as I wrote it I knew how weak it sounded, how inadequate. The cameras began to flicker one by one, not going dark, but showing brief flashes of movement, a shape crossing a doorway, a shadow pooling where it shouldn't. At 3:47 a.m. the figure appeared again. This time in a patient room, standing beside a bed that wasn't there anymore, its head bowed, shoulders rising and falling as if breathing. I felt a sudden overwhelming sadness, not fear, but grief so heavy it made my eyes burn. I realized then that the wing wasn't empty. Not really. It was full of moments that never ended, of pain that had nowhere to go. At 4:15 a.m. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside the security office, slow, dragging. I locked the door and turned off the lights, watching the camera feeds in the dark. The footsteps stopped right outside. The radio whispered again, numbers I didn't recognize, and then a word, stay. I pressed my back against the wall, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I didn't move. At 5 a.m. the activity ceased all at once. The cameras stabilized, the radio fell silent, the elevator panel went dark. Dawn crept in through the windows, and the hospital returned to its normal rhythm. Day staff arrived, chatting, laughing, unaware. I filed my report, leaving out nothing this time, and waited for someone to tell me I was wrong. Instead my supervisor closed the file, looked at me with tired eyes, and said the third-floor west wing was never fully emptied. Some patients died during the evacuation, others were moved but never really left. The records were sealed, the cameras kept running, and the rule about no patrols after 2 a.m. existed because those who went up there didn't come back the same. I quit that morning, but sometimes, late at night, the corporate when a room is too quiet, because it paid better than night retail, still hear it, because the building was supposed to be one of the safest contracts in the city. Long after the people steel high-rise downtown, 26 floors of offices, law firms, tech startups, and consulting agencies that went dead silent after 7 p.m. My shift started at 10 and ended at 6, 8 hours alone with cameras, badge scanners, and a logbook that rarely needed more than 2 lines a night. The building had a personality even before things went wrong. During the day it felt sharp and busy, elevators chiming, keyboards clacking, phones ringing, but at night it hollowed out, the hum of the HVAC system filling the gaps where people used to be. My post was a small security office in the basement level. No windows, just a bank of monitors mounted to the wall, 12 cameras total, each covering a different floor or access point. Camera 6 watched the 18th floor, an open-plan office used by a marketing firm that had moved out months earlier, rows of empty desks, rolling chairs pushed in, computer monitors unplugged. It was boring to look at, which is probably why I noticed immediately when something changed. At 11:38 p.m. on a Tuesday, while sipping burnt coffee and flipping through my phone, I glanced up and saw movement on camera 6. A chair, one of the rolling desk chairs near the center of the frame, was turning slowly. Not spinning wildly, just rotating a few degrees at a time, like someone had nudged it and it was finishing the motion on its own. I watched it come to a stop, told myself air circulation could do that, and went back to my phone. Then the overhead lights flicked on, just for a second, bright white, then off again. I sat up straighter, pulled the camera feed full screen. The office was empty, no silhouettes, no shadows, just desks and cubicles and that chair, now perfectly still. I checked the building systems. No scheduled after-hours work, no cleaning crew assigned to that floor. I logged it as a possible electrical fault, but a tight feeling settled in my chest. Around midnight the motion sensor alert chimed, 18th floor, camera 6. I frowned. Motion detection there was usually triggered by nothing at all, a change in lighting, a glitch. But this time when I pulled up the feed I heard something through the speakers, faint, rhythmic, a tapping sound, tap tap tap. It took me a second to realize what it sounded like, typing, the soft staccato of fingers on a keyboard. I turned the volume up, listening hard. The sound echoed slightly, as if bouncing off cubicle walls, but the camera showed no one, every desk empty, every monitor dark. The typing stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it made my ears ring. I leaned closer to the screen, scanning for movement. That was when one of the desk monitors flickered on, its screen glowing blue, then another. Like a wave moving across the office, I felt my mouth go dry, the motion sensor chimed again. I stood up, heart pounding, and grabbed my radio, calling out to see if any other guards were on duty. The building was solo coverage that night. No response. I broke protocol and rode the elevator up to the 18th floor, telling myself there had to be a rational explanation, some kind of prank, an electrical surge. When the doors opened, the floor was dark, emergency lighting casting long shadows. The air smelled stale, unused. I stepped out, flashlight sweeping the rows of desks. Everything was as it should be, chairs tucked in, monitors off, no sign of anyone having been there, no warmth from recently used equipment. I stood there listening, holding my breath, but there was nothing, no typing, no footsteps, just the low hum of the building. I went back down and tried to laugh it off, writing in the logbook, motion sensor false alarm, possible system fault. But my handwriting looked shaky even to me. Over the next few nights camera 6 became a problem. Not every night, but often enough that I started watching it more than the others. Sometimes it was small things, a chair angled differently, a desk lamp switched on. Sometimes it was bigger, an entire row of monitors lighting up at once, always after midnight, always when the building was supposed to be empty. I stopped going up to check, because every time I did the floor looked normal, like it was mocking me. The sounds though, those didn't stop. Typing, the soft whir of a printer spooling up and then cutting out. Once I heard a phone ring. Muffled and distant, I started bringing a notebook and writing down the times. 12:14 typing heard, 12:47 lights on then off, 1:03 motion alert. I noticed a pattern. Whatever it was never triggered the same camera twice in a row. It avoided the lobby, the stairwells, the loading dock. It stayed where it couldn't be seen directly, where only the cameras watched. The thought made my skin crawl. One night at 2:22 a.m. the elevator arrived at the basement on its own. Doors sliding open to reveal an empty car. The interior lights flickered then went dark. I hadn't called it. No one had badged in. I closed the doors and disabled the elevator. Hands shaking, writing in the logbook, unexplained elevator activity. Then, in a moment of clarity that felt more like panic, I wrote another line beneath it. Whatever it is, it knows where the cameras are. The realization hit me hard. The movements, the timing, the way it stayed just out of sight. It was aware of being watched. Aware of the angles, aware of me. The nights grew heavier after that. I stopped using my phone, stopped bringing books. My eyes stayed glued to the monitors, especially camera 6. The others showed nothing but empty hallways and locked doors. Camera 6 showed an office that no longer behaved like an empty space. At 3:11 a.m. one morning I saw the chair spin again, slower this time, deliberate, then stop facing directly toward the camera. As if it were looking back, I felt a wave of dizziness. A sense of being seen that had nothing to do with eyes. The typing started. Immediately after, louder than before, frantic, keys being struck in rapid bursts. I leaned forward, straining to hear words. But it was just noise, meaningless. Then the monitor on the desk closest to the camera flickered to life. White text appearing on a black screen. I couldn't read it clearly, but it looked like lines of code, scrolling too fast to follow. The feed glitched, static crawling across the screen. And when it cleared, the office was dark again. I sat back, breathing hard, my reflection staring back at me from the black glass of the monitors. I started to dread the nights, counting the hours until dawn. But I couldn't afford to quit, not yet. The final night came without warning. Everything was normal until 1:57 a.m., when all the monitors except camera 6 went black at once. No static, no warning, just darkness. Camera 6 stayed on, the only light in the room. showing the 18th floor office bathed in the glow of every desk monitor, all of them on, all of them displaying the same thing, a security camera feed, my security camera feed, the view from behind me, my chair, my hunched shoulders, my head turning slowly as I realized what I was seeing. The typing sound filled the room, deafening now. I spun around, the office behind me empty, but on the screen the image lagged, showing me still sitting, still watching, a second behind reality. The chair on camera 6 began to spin. Faster and faster, the image on the desk monitors zoomed in on my face. Pixelated and distorted, my own eyes staring back at me, the radio on the desk crackled, a voice whispering my name. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember running. Only the sound of my footsteps echoing as I fled the security office, the building lights flickering as if confused. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping in the cold air. I never went back to that job. I left my badge and keys on the guard desk the next morning and ignored every call from my supervisor, sometimes late. At night, when I pass office buildings and see a single floor lit up long after everyone's gone, I feel that same tightness in my chest, because I don't watch camera 6 anymore, it watches me. I took the overnight parking structure job because it was advertised as simple: sit in a booth, monitor cameras, collect tickets from the occasional late-night hospital worker or club employee, and make rounds once an hour. The garage itself was underground, 6 levels deep beneath a mixed-use complex, concrete pillars stretching out in every direction, painted numbers and arrows meant to keep people from getting lost. Though everyone did anyway. During the day it was noisy and chaotic, engines echoing, horns blaring, footsteps everywhere. But at night it transformed into something else entirely. The sound changed first, every noise lingering too long, footsteps echoing until they folded back on themselves. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and most nights after midnight I wouldn't see another person until sunrise, just me, the cameras, and the hum of fluorescent lights. The first week was uneventful. Boring even. I learned the layout, learned which cameras glitched, learned which levels smelled faintly of oil and which smelled damp like old rain trapped in concrete. It was on my 9th shift that I first noticed the footsteps. I was doing my 1 a.m. round on level B4, flashlight beam cutting through the rows of parked cars, when I heard them behind me, slow, steady, matching my pace exactly, step, step, step. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned around, saw nothing but empty spaces and concrete pillars. I laughed nervously and told myself sound traveled weird down there, probably my own footsteps echoing. I finished the round and logged nothing. At 2 a.m., on level B5, I heard them again, same rhythm, same distance, always just out of sight. Again they stopped when I stopped. Again there was nothing there when I turned around. Unease settled in my gut, but I brushed it off. Garages are strange places at night. People say that all the time. By the 3rd night it became a pattern. Every hour on the hour, during my rounds, the footsteps followed me, never closer, never farther, never revealing themselves. At first I tried changing my pace, walking faster, slower, stopping abruptly. The footsteps mirrored me perfectly. Like a delayed echo that thought for itself, I started timing them, checking my watch, always at 1:02, 2:02, 3:02, as if something was keeping the same schedule I was. Then the car alarm started. The first one blared at 2:47 a.m. Level B2. I checked the camera feed. No movement, no flashing lights, just the sound, muffled through the concrete, echoing through the structure. I rushed up, expecting to find a car with a faulty alarm, but when I reached the road the sound stopped instantly. There were no cars at all in that section, empty spaces, faded lines, nothing that could have been making noise. I stood there for a long time, listening to my own breathing, before going back to the booth and writing in the log, unexplained alarm, no vehicle present. The words looked wrong on the page. like a joke that wasn't funny. The cameras started acting up shortly after, feeds looping, skipping backward a few seconds and replaying the same empty stretch of concrete over and over. I rebooted the system, checked the cables, nothing fixed it. Sometimes I'd watch myself on camera walking down a ramp, only to see the footage reset and show me starting the walk again. My stomach would drop every time, like watching a memory repeat itself incorrectly. The strangest night came on my third week, around 3:30 a.m., when I saw someone on camera B6, a person walking between the pillars on the lowest level. I leaned forward, heart pounding, finally relieved to see another human presence. I grabbed my radio and called out, asking them to identify themselves. No response. The figure moved closer to the camera, and my relief curdled into dread. They were wearing the same uniform I was, same jacket, same reflective stripes, same hat pulled low. When the figure stepped into the light, I saw my own face staring back at me. Pale, tired, eyes hollow, I staggered back from the monitors, knocking my chair over. When I looked again, the camera feed was empty. I laughed, a high, panic sound, telling myself I was exhausted, hallucinating. But the image burned itself into my mind. From that night on, time stopped behaving normally. My watch would jump backward. I'd check it during a round, see 2:15 a.m., finish the loop, and look again to find it was 1:48. The clocks on the walls didn't agree with each other anymore. One said 3:10. Another said 2:03. My phone battery drained rapidly no matter how little I used it. I started writing down times obsessively, trying to anchor myself, but the logbook filled with contradictions, entries out of order, times that repeated, entire hours missing. The footsteps never stopped. They became a constant companion, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, sometimes circling, always matching my pace, always reminding me I wasn't alone, even though I was. One night, or what I thought was one night, I followed the sound instead of running from it. On level B6, flashlight shaking in my hand, I turned down a long empty aisle and saw myself again, standing with my back to me, staring at a concrete wall. I called out my own name without thinking. The figure turned slowly, smiling in a way I never smiled, a tired, resigned expression, and said, "You're late." The words echoed strangely, overlapping themselves. I stumbled back, tripped, and when I looked again, the aisle was empty. But the footsteps were now in front of me, leading me deeper into the garage. I don't know how long I wandered after that. Levels blurred together. B3 looked like B5. Ramps led back to the same place. Arrows pointed nowhere useful. The cameras showed me walking in circles, always passing the same pillar with a faded yellow stripe, always missing the exit by a few feet. My logbook entries grew frantic. Footsteps again, alarms again, saw him again, time wrong. I checked the booth clock and saw 6:58 a.m. Relief flooding me, my shift almost over, but when I blinked it read 11:12 p.m., the start of my shift. I felt something break inside me then, a realization settling in that the garage wasn't just a place, it was a system, a loop, and I was part of it now. The last clear memory I have is sitting in the booth, pen in hand, writing the final entry, my handwriting barely legible. I don't think I ever clocked out. The page after that is blank. But sometimes I swear I can still feel the vibration of footsteps through the concrete, hear alarms echoing where there are no cars, see a figure at the edge of my vision moving exactly the way I move, because some buildings don't want to be empty. I found the logbook weeks after I quit, tucked into the bottom of a moving box I hadn't unpacked yet, its cover warped, corners soft like it had absorbed too much night air. I didn't remember taking it home. I was sure I'd left it in the booth. But there it was, heavy in my hands, smelling faintly of dust and ink. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it and started reading. Familiar entries jumped out immediately. My handwriting, dates I recognized, notes about alarms, cameras, footsteps. But as I turned the pages, something felt wrong. The entries didn't stop where I remembered they should. Nights continued long after my resignation date. Names of guards I knew crossed out, replaced with shaky scrawls. The handwriting began to change slowly, letter by letter, stretching, slanting, as if someone was learning how to write by copying me. Some entries were calm, observational, others frantic. Pages filled edge to edge with warnings: don't follow it, don't trust the clocks, always. Write it down. My pulse quickened as I reached the final pages. The ink there looked fresh, darker, not yet faded, and then I saw it, the last entry already written, dated tonight. It described me sitting on my couch, lamp on, reading the logbook with a growing sense of dread. My breath caught as I read the final line beneath it, neat and certain. Shift begins at midnight. I closed the book and sat in silence, listening to my apartment settle, the distant hum of the city outside, thinking about all those nights spent watching empty spaces, believing vigilance was enough to keep me safe. Night work teaches you how loneliness feels when it has weight, how silence can watch back. So if you work nights and something feels off, if the building seems to breathe when you're alone, write it down, because someone else may need the warning, and because some logs don't just record the shift, they make sure it never really ends.